So you can have this autonomous technology that goes around your warehouse space, forms the warehouse into a digital version of itself, therefore creating a digital twin. But more importantly, what it does, it brings information from every single location inside the space, from every single part of that warehouse, and makes that accessible to pretty much anyone in the world. So if you're looking at live inventory tracking, eliminating any kind of errors in the WMS, live estimation of how well the space is utilized, maybe you can do a rearrangement of your warehouse and fit another customer in. These are huge efficiency gains and also huge, not just cost saving, but a lot of business impact. You create a lot of value by being able to run the spaces more efficiently and eliminating errors from the operation.
Launch sequence activated.
Hello and welcome to the Maersk Growth podcast, a podcast that takes you on an open-ended exploration of the most transformative trends and latest insights into supply chain technology. The podcast is brought to you by Maersk Growth, the venture arm of A.P. Møller - Mærsk. In the podcast, we will dive into the venture ecosystem and bring you interviews with founders, experts, and other interesting guests, discussing the most interesting ideas, developments, and the people behind them. My name is Jannik Pedersen, and I will be your host today. As always, if you are a startup working on digitizing, democratizing, or decarbonizing global supply chains and are interested in collaboration, please reach out to us at growth@maersk.com or visit our website, maersk.com/growth. So sit back, relax, and join us on this journey as we explore supply chain technology and startups. So welcome to this episode of the Maersk Growth podcast. We have a very, very interesting topic of the future of warehouses and digital twins. To talk about that, we have the founder of Dexory, Andrei Danescu. So welcome to the podcast, Andrei. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks a lot for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Perfect. And thanks as well from our side. So maybe just we could start kicking off with a short introduction of you and basically what you did leading up to founding Dexory.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is technical. In engineering, I studied back in university, electronics, control systems, always had a big passion for robotics and for data analytics. From university, I transitioned over to a career working in motorsport. So I had a huge fascination with real-time data coming from race cars and how you can transform that into insights. So it's kind of guided me towards Formula One. So I spent a bit of time in motorsports, and then I ended up working in Formula One as a control systems engineer. But even that wasn't enough. I always wanted more. It's a hugely fast-paced world, but from there I transitioned to autonomous off-road driving. I worked with the guys from Jaguar Land Rover. I did tire modeling, state estimation, some pretty really interesting topics. And then from there, I kind of went back to my original true love and passion, which was autonomous systems, which was robots. So that's kind of what prompted me to fund the Dexory with my two co-founders, Juan and Adrian. We got together, we were sharing a common passion for the space and a lot of interest into how we can transform real-time data into actionable insights for people that can, and businesses that can leverage these.
Yeah, super interesting. And maybe we can come back to the Formula One background. I'm very curious to hear how you apply those learnings today. And so maybe just starting very high level. So what inspired you to found Dexory and what are you really building? What is the essence?
The essence of Dexory is the fact that it's a global visibility platform that's powered by autonomous robotic systems. It started from transforming data into actionable insights, but applying this to a real world problem, not just building the technology for the sake of building the technology. So the thing that gets us really excited is seeing how powerful and transformative these insights are to businesses and seeing how much warehouses, for example, can benefit from this real-time visibility. That's one of the things that motivates us to push even through the hardest problems. And that's also unique when you look at a platform that you have across hundreds of locations and you can see all the data from all of them at your fingertips. It's truly incredible.
Yeah. And maybe you can just elaborate a little bit on sort of what are the specific problems in that visibility and warehouse context you are addressing?
I think you can start from basically measuring, tracking, and finding anything in the warehouse. So you can have this autonomous technology that goes around your warehouse space, forms the warehouse into a digital version of itself, therefore creating a digital twin. But more importantly, what it does, it brings information from every single location inside the space, from every single part of that warehouse, and makes that accessible to pretty much anyone in the world. So if you're looking at live inventory tracking, eliminating any kind of errors in the WMS, live estimation of how well the space is utilized, maybe you can do a rearrangement of your warehouse and fit another customer in. These are huge efficiency gains, and also huge, not just cost saving, but a lot of business impact. You create a lot of value by being able to run the spaces more efficiently and eliminating errors from the operation.
Yeah. And maybe just doubling down a little bit on that, I could also imagine it's difficult to understand from the outside. Why don't we know or have more transparency on actually what is going on in the warehouse or where things are, and basically those use cases you just mentioned?
Yeah, it's super interesting, and it's a question that we had ourselves when we first started exploring the space. Fundamentally, the problem and the challenge with knowing all the time where everything is and eliminating these errors is the fact that generically warehouses would run as an open loop system. There's some certain products go into them. There's some data that kind of says where these products are, where these pallets are, but there's no way of closing that loop in real time. The way people historically have done it is by taking inventory or taking a stock, doing a stock check, but that is extremely labor intensive. As you can imagine, your warehouses are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're getting taller as well. So being able to run real-time inventory is virtually impossible. By the time, even if you had the team dedicated, that would be, let's assume 100 people, they would start at one end of the warehouse. By the time they finish, the data is already sort of like changed. So you're fighting this continuous battle, and it's very, very difficult, repetitive. And more importantly, it's very hard to gather this level of information, this depth of information that an autonomous device can do. You gather everything from pictures, understanding what volumes you have occupied, understanding how efficient the space is actually used. That's been the issue and the challenge so far, because yes, you can make the argument that potentially if you had this team of 100 people, you could get the data. It would be extremely expensive, and you would not have it on a continuous basis. So historically, that's been the difficult thing. That's been the impossible thing, is to collect this information non-stop, basically.
Yeah, no, make total sense. Then maybe you can explain a bit on how you are solving that problem sort of through merging both robotics and software. So maybe you can visualize that for the listener.
The easiest way to visualize it is if you imagine an architectural drawing of a space. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be a warehouse, but let's take a warehouse for an example. And on this plan, you could click anywhere and you could understand immediately what's happening in that location. So you'd have a high-level overview, but then you would have the ability to go into every single location in your space and know exactly what products are there, how well that space is utilized, if you're making the most in terms of monetization of that specific cube. So that, I hope this kind of paints a better picture. Yeah. But that's the idea. The idea is that you give them this instant access to any information from within your premises.
Yeah. And maybe you can also just, in a similar fashion, sort of give the view on how does your robot look like, actually the autonomous robot navigating the warehouse, collecting all this valuable information, and what are sort of some of the specs around that technology?
I think we can proudly say that we have the world's tallest autonomous robot, which is an interesting record to hold. But I think you can easily imagine the size of a Euro pallet. So the robot would be, as a footprint, slightly larger than that. It's about 1.5 meters long and about 1 meter wide. And it has this expandable tower that sits on top of the base footprint. And this can extend up to 12, 15 meters, allowing us to scan pretty much any height of the warehouse. And in terms of the way it would operate, so it usually operates and moves around with the tower sort of like fully compressed. It gets to a scanning location, expands the tower, and you have a number of cameras, basically one camera for every single location in the warehouse. So that's where it gets really interesting. As the robot navigates down an aisle, it collects the entire aisle information as it passes along. So if you had a 100-meter aisle, the robot would be able to collect that entire aisle, however many thousand locations you would have in there, in probably 200 seconds, which is actually record time if you think about it.
Yeah, that is super fast. And how does that just compare to how much time a human would spend on it, just for a comparison?
So it's difficult to compare one-to-one because a human would be able to scan the bottom 1 or 2 levels faster because it would require no machinery to do that. But on average, you're seeing 40 seconds on location to be able to scan and to be able to collect that information. So if you assume you have 100 meters and you have about 2 meters for each space, then you have 100 divided by 2, you have about 50 locations, multiplied by 40 seconds for location. You can immediately see the difference there on one single row. And the interesting bit is when you generalize the problem, is the fact that as you're trying to do this on the top shelves, it becomes more and more complicated because you have to use machinery to get yourself physically up there.
Yeah, I could imagine. So sort of when you're discussing this technology with your customers and collaborators and so on, what is it particular that excites your customers around this digital twin technology and sort of these new avenues that you are sort of opening with your technology?
So that's a good question because it's always interesting when you bring new technology and new applications of technology into the market. Digital twins per se are not something that is new in the space. We've been using digital twin technology in various areas, various fields of engineering for quite some time now. But our interpretation of a digital twin is we don't go out to reconstruct the entire warehouse in terms of the architectural setup of the space, but we focus on the applicability of this technology to solving the business problem. So we use the digital twin technology to reconstruct the racking system, for example, which in terms allows us to get the detailed view of what's happening in every single location. So when we show it to customers, again, just telling them, okay, we have a digital twin of the warehouse, they're going to ask us, so what? Which is a very, very good question to ask. And it's a very valid point. I don't need a digital twin of the warehouse. I need to understand how to run my business more efficiently. So the answer to that so what question is, by having this ability and this very precise view of what's happening, you therefore derive the insights. And this is what we serve customers. We serve them the insights on how they can run their space better, how they can make changes to the operation to be more efficient.
Yeah. And do you have any examples of some of these productivity or efficiency gains you are enabling for your customers? What are really, the so what's you sort of make them think about?
I definitely think of a few examples. The technology is really new. We've only released it to the wider world, to the public audience about a month and a bit ago. So just over a month. But we have a couple of customers which are very excited and are using it already. One good example we have is one of the fast-moving cargo handlers. They were renegotiating a contract with one of their customers, and the customers were pushing for them to get more space. As you can imagine, space, especially warehousing space around airports, is extremely expensive. So it's a huge premium, and it's also very difficult. You can't just go in and build something. So a lot of the time it's prohibitive because you do not have this option. What we were able to offer them is saying, guys, look, we've been running the technology already. We've been running this deployment for a couple of weeks now. We can give you real-time data and visibility as to how occupied the warehouse was at any point in the day. They took the information, they ran the report over an entire month and went back to their customers and said, guys, we've never been more than 65% occupied. So there's no reason for us to actually look at getting another space. But this was a big aha moment for them because no one expected
impactful analysis.
Exactly. It's you would say, oh, this is simplistic, but you have to remember that historically there has been no way of even gathering this data, let alone run the analysis. And this is factual, accurate data that you can go at any point back in time and check that it's been real. So it's validated with a snapshot of how the warehouse looked at that point in time.
Yeah. No, make it total sense. Then maybe just doubling down a little bit, sort of, which kind of customers are your platform particularly applicable for now, and sort of which type of warehouse can you sort of really enable efficiency gains on sort of here and now?
Again, so like a very interesting question because we're not trying to be everything for everyone. And we can't be everything for everyone. We have to be really selective of the customers we work with because the solution needs to provide the right ROI. For example, we don't do anything in frozen environments. So frozen warehouses are a completely no-go space for us. And we don't do anything in warehouses where there isn't a certain level of technology already installed. So there are still warehouses, for example, they store all the goods on the ground. We can't touch that because if it's a cross-docking warehouse or cross-docking operation, or a warehouse where you don't have a way to even access those goods, we don't have a way of scanning them. So if you work on the principle that we put them there with a forklift, we leave them there and then we take them out, you can't really use our technology. You can't use any visually based technology to be able to gather that data. And the other sort of like almost immediately obvious one, we don't work with warehouses that don't have a WMS or they don't have a way of knowing how they're keeping track of things inside their space. If they're using pen and paper, it's probably a bit too big of a step for them to jump at autonomous robots. Maybe there's other interim areas they can focus on.
Yeah, that'll make total sense. And maybe following up on that, then from an integration point of view, sort of the warehouse need a VMS. I would imagine you VMS agnostic. Are there anything else sort of that is needed from the warehouse point of view for sort of your solution to be implemented?
The short answer is no. There is no infrastructure change that needs to happen in the warehouse. There is virtually no change that needs to happen. If the operation is run correct, or if the operation is being monitored to be running correctly, then there is no problem. Some of the things we discover is, for example, people don't put pallets on the racks the right way around. So there's no visible labels, which is problematic, not for our technology to scan them. We can't scan them because it's an optical based system. But it's also a real problem for the operations because anyone else trying to find the pallets is going to have to now start searching for them. And there's a high chance they get the wrong pallet in the wrong location. So that's an easy thing we tend to correct within a couple of weeks of running our system and our technology. And then the other one, I would say, you touched on it very, very well. We are WMS agnostic, but we do require a data exchange with the WMS. And so we have found it a lot easier to do a one-way integration or to do a data export from a WMS for us to be able to scan the warehouse and then process all the information, process all the data, create the insights, and then serve the insights back into the business.
Yeah, okay, very clear. Then maybe sort of going a bit more back to the conceptual or visionary view. What is sort of your vision for the warehouse of the future and how does Dexory fit into that?
I actually like this question a lot because I think there's a lot of things, there's a lot of technologies that are coming at the right level of maturity these days to really, really make an impact and drive performance and drive efficiencies into the industry. So I think for us, the way we look at the warehouse of the future, the way we position ourselves first and foremost as a company is to be a global intelligence platform. So at the moment we use autonomous robots because it's a very elegant way to collect the data. But the value, the large scale value we bring to customers is the fact that they can keep a continuous eye of all their operations at the global level. Yeah. As you project this into the future, I'll give you a more specific example. Because you're running this technology in America and you have 50 warehouses there, you understand how to best organize them, how to create the biggest efficiency for specific product lines. If you then want to bring these product lines in Europe, you can simply go into the system and say, hey, how do I best optimize my warehouse for this type of operation? By the time your goods have been shipped from the US or from China to Europe to be displayed or to be used in the warehouse, everything has already been changed and transformed. So whether you do this in the future with autonomous robots or with forklifts or with people moving goods around, you can do it. And the point is here, you can do it in a seamless way. You can have one single system whereby you can go and ask it, how do I best run my operation? And it's going to be able to take all these data points and data sources to allow you to run at the best possible efficiency. And what that does, it has so many side effects that are so beneficial to the operation. First and foremost, everyone working in the warehouse can operate a little bit more relaxed. And everyone knows just how big the labor gap is in the industry at the moment. So, by having a happier team that works in your warehouses is a huge, huge added benefit. You can actually afford to increase the size of the team if you want to, because you're not always fighting with lost revenue. You can increase the revenue they're putting through the warehouses. The environment impact is massively reduced because you're not running an inefficient operation where you end up potentially utilizing the entire rack location, but only storing half the rack capacity, even if it's distributed across the rack. So all your ratings and your carbon footprint gets reduced and your ratings get increased. So everything is running better. It's very interesting when you look at it because, again, when you think the warehouse of the future, how far in the future are we talking? This warehouse is built for like 30 years. So what we build today, it's going to be the warehouse that our next generations are going to be using as well.
Yeah, exactly. So also maybe as I understand you, you're not only making the individual warehouse intelligence, it's really the network of warehouses across regions and of course the transportation in between them. Are you also enabling different stakeholders to interact in that system? So it's also like some sort of collaboration platform.
Yes. I was saving this for last and I was hoping you would ask me the question, because what we have with Dexory View is a unique platform that allows multiple levels of users to log in and add different comments and work on it. Imagine as if you worked on a shared spreadsheet or a shared document. So it creates a completely new way of approaching exchange and information exchange and collaboration at the warehouse level across multiple warehouses. And then at the global level, you can go into the detail. In this location in my warehouse in Kettering, I have this product, and I can then tag someone from the local warehouse who can then tag someone from the global business intelligence team. So everything becomes streamlined and a lot easier and more accessible to everyone.
Yeah, super interesting. Just also in the interest of time, I want to change gear a little bit. I actually think it was about this time, maybe in a few months, we met for the first time last year. And then, of course, I have been following your journey, and disclosure-wise, we are an investor in Dexory and a proud investor. But what has always really impressed me is the speed you move with, both in terms of innovation in the hardware layer and the software layer. So you really want to understand what enables you to move with such speed, and how are you making decisions, and how are you going about product development? Because I think that's quite unique.
So you're asking me about the secret ingredient. I think it's, again, I think it's a good question, and we can always be moving faster, that's fact. But at the moment, it feels like we really have the right team in place to enable this crazy amount of speed of delivering a very, very complex product and a very complex technology stack into customers' hands. And I'll be honest with you, the way we've done it and the thing that's helped us the most has been having total control over what we're developing and delivering. So as a company, we're a full stack solution provider, pretty well vertically integrated. And we have control from everything from the mechanical and electromechanical components all the way through the entire autonomy stack. So the entire software that allows our robots to operate autonomously, the entire data processing and capturing part of our tech stack, all the way to the cloud-based platform and the APIs and the customer integrations. Now, what this means, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a more complex team to manage and harder to scale as a company, because you have all these different varieties and diversities of engineering challenges. But on the other hand, you don't depend on anyone. And if you don't depend on anyone, it means that it's genuinely down to you, to how fast you move and how fast you react to the market and the challenges and the problems that you're solving. So that's the secret ingredient. Now you know it, being able to have this control across everything we're building, and being able to avoid depending on anyone or waiting for anyone to deliver things that enable us to do various use cases and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and then of course combined with an extremely talented team. Can you talk a little bit more about the team? I think I've heard it's quite an international team, and to find the right people, you have recruited quite broad.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the team behind it is literally what makes the magic happen. Without it, we wouldn't be having this conversation and we wouldn't be where we are today. It's a very international team. We're very proud to say that we have more nationalities in the team than we actually have team members, because a lot of our girls and guys have multiple nationalities and so on. It's a relatively young team as well. I'm extremely motivated, extremely dedicated, and pushing really, really hard, as I'm sure you can imagine, to be able to achieve what we have achieved. It's very well versed in pretty much all the areas of engineering, like I said, from mechanical system design to building, electronic design and engineering, firmware, software, you name it, we probably make it in-house. But again, what's really exciting is to see the speed at which we can solve problems, because we bring so many different points of view, and because we bring so many different past experience from so many different fields of engineering.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe then continuing a bit on that track, what have been the key learnings around both innovating within a hardware and of course then also merging with a software layer so far when scaling this holistic platform?
I think the important things when solving a problem or creating the solution to the problem you're looking to solve is whatever solution you design needs to be the best way of solving that problem. So when we looked at creating this incredible robot, which allows us to scan the entire racks, we took into account what the customer wants. We took into account the speed of delivery and the speed at which they want their data returned. And even down to things like safety and the ability to work in a fully operational warehouse without having to close any area of the warehouse without any kind of risk to the existing workforce. So you distill all this into your hardware product, let's call it, or whatever specific physical thing enables you to do that. That needs to be best positioned, and then it needs to be the best tool for the job. But the way you stay on top of answering the business needs as they progress, as they evolve, is having a very powerful software distribution layer. The value that you create is being able to process all this data into insights. And the way you're going to be able to bulletproof yourself for the future is to have a way of deploying new upgrades and new updates to your device or devices in the field. Because what you're solving for now is almost guaranteed that's going to be changing. So you need to have a way in which you don't always want to come up with a new product into the market, but you come up with new features and new ways of solving the problem for your customers.
I think definitely that's quite insightful. Would you have any sort of advices to other founders or startups that sort of are trying to innovate the hardware layer of both warehouses or more like broadly supply chains?
I think that this is a good question and it's a complex answer, I would say. But what I think is one of the ways of approaching this problem or what worked better for us was to avoid over-optimizing at the beginning. So this focus on speed and delivering value to customers, yes, when you start out, it's not going to be the most efficient way. You are going to have to use more expensive components in order to move faster, but that's always a trade-off you're assessing. I think, again, going back to the element of speed, if you can bring something into the market and if you can prove value to customers, then you can buy yourself more time to optimize for various factors later down the line. But if you try to over-optimize and over-index at the beginning on factors like how well your system is performing, how well your system is going to have to cope with, 1 million users down the line, or, every last bit of cost optimization into your sensors, all those factors are irrelevant. When you're small and you're bringing innovative tech into the market, you need to move fast. You will have time and a good problem to solve later on when you are going to have 1 million users. But again, you assess the complexity of the problem and the solution, and you have to realize that 1 million users are not going to happen overnight. They're not going to take you by surprise.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe sort of in that context, how do you really bring an enterprise-grade product as a startup to the market? I know you didn't mention any names, but you worked with some pretty large companies. How do you think about that?
I think first and foremost, you need to have an enterprise grade and enterprise quality level of your product. So it needs to look in a certain way, it needs to perform in a certain way. You need to pay attention to things like UI and UX, usability. In our case, for example, because we have huge data sets, how do you make it easy for people to actually get their insights? Because if I send you an email with 1 million pictures that I've taken in 5 minutes last night, and I say, picture 521, it's going to be difficult to find that. So when you look at enterprise level, you have to have a state-of-the-art product. But more importantly, you also have to have the right partners. So you could have the best product in the world if you don't have the credibility, if you don't have the right partners working alongside with you. It will not be impossible, but it will be more difficult to convince these large corporations that, they need to sign a contract with you for the next 5 to 6 years.
Yeah. Are there anything you would have wished you'd known about either warehouses or some of these partners you mentioned and so on before you started Dexory?
The one part we didn't realize immediately was just how excited the industry was for new technology and the speed at which people scale this technology inside the industry. So that's one of the things that was a very, very pleasant revelation, I would say, is okay, you're working hard. They're B2B enterprise type of accounts. They will take quite a lot of time to convert. But once you've proven the ROI and you are inside these companies, the speed at which they scale is incredible. And for us, that was one of the key factors. And I wish we would have appreciated how much faster we're going to have to move past the initial points.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are you then experiencing any sort of physical supply chain issues in that context actually to scale when you have proven the value, or sort of how is that illustrated?
I think we have some challenges. I wouldn't say they're issues. They're problems that we need to solve. I mean, we work in the logistics industry and we have a logistics problem. I like to believe we have the right partners, or at least the right customers that can offer some advice here. But I'll give you an example. We are working with a very, very large cargo handler, and they want to scale this globally. So we have Johannesburg, we have Australia, we have the Americas, North and South, we have Canada.
Yeah.
We have a couple of sites in Europe, and you're looking at this and thinking, this is genuinely the whole planet. Like, they want to put this in almost all locations, all their key locations. So it's very quickly escalating to a completely different level of operation. So I think that was one of the big drivers for us, was going to be, okay, this is not an industry where you can take it step by step and think that they're going to do a warehouse, then tomorrow they're going to do 3. No, people get behind it and they rally behind it. They say, okay, has huge ROIs, it has huge potential to be transformative. We need to start deploying this at scale. And that creates a completely different set of challenges in its own right.
Yeah, super interesting example. I mean, just high level, how did you go about that as a relative small startup out of the UK, sort of having to serve, I think you mentioned Australia, different parts of US and so on. I mean, that seems like an immense challenge or opportunity.
It is both an immense challenge and opportunity, of course. The way we approached it was being very, very transparent with our partners, with our customers, and saying, hey, we can't do everything, and definitely we can't do everything tomorrow. If you have a good relationship with your customer, they should understand. They are talking to a very, very smart team. They're talking to a company that will do everything they can to keep the customer satisfaction as high as possible. But there are practicalities to how far we can stretch ourselves. So we took a step back and said, hey, look, let's sit down together and analyze this from a strategic point of view. What makes most sense for you guys? What is non-negotiable? We need to have this technology deployed in some key locations, but also what makes more sense for us, because we don't have one customer in this situation. We have 4 or 5. If we can start grouping them and lumping them together, we have areas that we need to actually serve now. So the problem becomes different. I wouldn't say it becomes simple or it becomes easier, but it becomes a little bit easier for us to manage.
Yeah. Okay, very clear. Then maybe the last question before we go to a few smaller questions. Are there any sort of areas around hardware as a service or software as a service in the context of warehouses where you have sort of contrarian views or different views than what sort of you're experiencing from the market or when you're listening to other experts in this area?
I think there are definitely different approaches. One thing that was interesting for us is mapping out the value we bring to customers. And I think this is something that any company that's looking to thrive in the space should do. Because if the value is the actual hardware that you're bringing, i.e. a physical machine that moves boxes around, for example, you need to be able to monetize this in a certain way. For us, the value has never been in the hardware. The hardware is, like I mentioned before, a means to an end, a way of collecting the data. So for us, the value is in the data insights we provide and the platform that we offer. Yeah. Now, this needs to be monetized in a completely different way because, again, it's hardware agnostic, and it doesn't sit in the same, even in the same budget as some of the forklifts that these guys are using or some of the automation systems they already have deployed. So I think this would be my advice, and this would be our learning as well, is be very, very clear and map very well the value that you're bringing and understand kind of where the bulk of this comes from.
Yeah, makes sense. Then if fine with you, I would just like to go into a quick rapid fire, just with a few very small questions where we would like a quick answer. Is that okay?
I can try.
First of all, how does Formula One compare to a startup life?
Formula One is a team sport. It's one of the highest degree of engineering sports, but it is a sport that you get measured every week and judged on your results. Startups, need to operate at the same velocity, but the measurement windows are longer, far longer. So it's maybe difficult or more difficult to keep your eye on a price and stay motivated while running that ultra marathon.
Okay. And then what are the key sort of leadership principles or learnings you have gotten out of that, being in both contexts?
The key learning I had is everyone needs an off season. If it's a sport, if it's a team, that's why Formula One has a mandatory shutdown over summer. People need to relax and recharge. Yeah. It's the same with us. We've been pushing super hard and you can see people are getting tired. So you need to bake in a sustainable off season. You don't need to drop performance. You just need to know how to manage it. Yeah. So you take very good care of your team and you make sure that the team is performing at its best.
Yeah. What a great advice. And then second, what is the best advice you have been given this year in this sort of climate we are in now?
The best advice I've had was focus on doing as much of the landing of your accounts as you can early on. If things become more difficult towards the end of the year, the questions people ask are going to get tougher. If you already have customers using the technology, it's going to be easier to expand with existing customer base than continuously try and add new ones.
Yeah. And if not Dexory, what would be sort of the next problem in a supply chain context you would set out to solve?
The next big problem I would probably look at, it's a little bit of what we're doing, but adding your predictive, more advanced and more sophisticated predictive technology to supply chain problems. So I think everyone's going crazy for the famous ChatGPT. The thing having something like that you could just have it trained on specific challenges that the logistics industry has, and you can actually use it to solve problems, not to solve them, but to give you the right suggestions so it makes problem solving easier.
Yeah. And lastly, what inspires you?
One of the biggest sources of inspiration I have at this point in time is seeing the impact our technology has on customers' operations. I'll be very honest with you, it gets you out of bed and it helps you push through the hardest of times. When you see what you've created and the impact that you can drive, is incredibly inspirational.
Yeah, and what a great end sort of to conclude this podcast. Thanks a lot, Andrei. I think this was a highly interesting discussion, both getting around the hardware, the software, the future of warehouses, what digital twin means and so on. So thanks a lot for participating, and hopefully you will come again in the future to elaborate on your journey.
Thank you very much for the invitation as well.
And with that brings us to the end of an exciting episode of the Maersk Growth podcast. For us to keep developing, we would love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. So please feel free to reach out to us at growth@maersk.com or through LinkedIn. If you found this podcast valuable, please consider subscribing to it at your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review and rating. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep exploring.